Well, good evening, boys and girls. It is once again time for 10 to 1, the awesome list podcast where Jen and I give each other an assignment for the week and we come up with a list of 10 movies, count them down 10 to 1. Get it? And we are in the midst of spooky season. This is part 3 of our 4-part series when it comes to spooky season. And I'm really excited for tonight's show. But before I get into all that, I'm Josh, and joined, as always, by the Jen.
Yeah, okay. That works. That's great. That is super awesome. Thank you very much. I am Jen actually, so it
Mhm.
totally fits and tonight
Appropriate.
is going to be a fun list. I can safely say I have not ever and most likely never will encounter any of the creatures that are on this list. Um all of the creatures are mostly scary. I mean, maybe I don't know. No, they're all scary. I don't think any of them are anything that you'd want to meet in your everyday life. Um, okay, I got to tell the story. So creatures have a really I have a love hate relationship with creaturey things, right? And I think it stems from my true phobia. I'm trying to figure it out, but I have a true phobia of spiders. And of course, the people around me who know and love me and want to basically torture me, they all know about this phobia too. So last night, my kid actually sent me a TikTok that had a cane spider in it. And if you live in Hawaii, you know that cane spiders are they're spiders that look like they have consumed at least 2 cans of Monster, and they jet. I mean, they skitter so fast across your house, your walls. It's crazy. Oftentimes, people don't see them because they actually are that fast, but they're also big. Cane spiders can get huge. So when they're in your house, they're kind of terrifying. Okay, so my kid sends me this TikTok about somebody who found a cane spider in their house when they live in Hawaii, and I was like, "Oh, how dare you!" And about maybe 20 minutes later, I was in my room and I had taken out the trash and I missed a small piece of hair that apparently came out of my hairbrush and had fallen onto the floor. And when I say that I saw this thing and it moved because the wind blew it, um, I I don't even know how to describe the kind of person that I turned into other than I was in fear for my life from a small piece of hair. And I know it sounds hilarious and honestly it was.
Oh, I'm sure it was. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's terrible.
Even my kid was like, "Oh my god, why wasn't I there to see this?" Um but yeah, that's the reaction that I was thinking I would want to have with any one of the creatures that are on my list. Like run in terror kind of response. And so with that loving idea in mind, that's where I feel like we should start our list. I don't know. How did you curate your list, Josh?
I kind of went in the not necessarily opposite direction, but I went in a direction of um, more of how impressed I was by the technical work or how the creatures themselves were character.
Mm,
So I looked at it as more of some of my favorite characters that are creatures.
nice. Well, one more just quick FYI. I was telling Josh before the show that it's the first time in a long time that it's been cool enough to keep my house open in the middle of the day, not have the AC on. So if you hear the dreaded chickens in the background, just know I live on Maui. Chickens are everywhere. They roosters crow at all times of the day and night. It's kind of like living on a barnyard, on a farm. We don't, but there you go. Just in case. Just
We've all
wanted to
seen Moana.
clear that out of the way. Oh gosh. Yeah, see, I don't feel like it didn't used to be this way, but yeah, this is where we are. So here we go.
Everyone's like, we need a chicken.
Oh my god. Apparently, the chickens are so bad right now. Because at one point, I don't know, decade ago or so, they they used to do a lot of chicken fighting here, like a lot of chicken fighting. Um, and there's been a huge crackdown. But hey, a huge crackdown on chicken fighting means there's a whole lot of chickens running around everywhere. And now there are good-natured people who honestly want to help. And they feed feral colonies of chickens that just roam the island. It's the craziest thing. People get off the plane, hop over to, the supermarket, Safeway or whatever, and they're walking across the parking lot and they'll go, "Oh, there's chickens in the parking lot." And we're like, "Yeah, yeah, not a big deal, guys." It's hilarious. One of my friends from the mainland said, "I didn't realize that Maui was so rural." And I was like, really? You think it's like that rural?" And they were like, "Yeah, there's chickens everywhere." So yeah, it was pretty funny.
Oh,
None of my
go to
creatures.
Key West.
None of my creatures are. See, and there's this crazy theory on the island that says what we really need is a hurricane to blow the chickens away. And I'm like, could we think of something a little less costly than a hurricane to blow the chickens away? I don't think this is a good plan, guys.
But it's better than no plan.
Well, I mean, it's a funny plan, but yeah, no thanks. I will take the chickens anyway. Okay, so I'm gonna actually invite you to go first and tell me what your number 10 choice is, and also in this one, I mean, tell us a little bit like about the movie, but also tell us why you chose the creature, because I feel like this is actually kind of important. Like, some of mine are not really movies that I particularly love as much as I love the creatures in them. So give us a little bit of that.
I think I can do that.
All right.
Well, I am going to instantly jump into the theme that we started running with when it comes to our spooky season list. And that's by talking about a family that moves into a house. If we recall, I seem to do that a lot. So, here we are in my number 10. My number 10, 1973. It's the story of a family that moves into a house, and the wife happens upon these creatures that want to take her with them to their world to get away from her psychologically abusive husband and family. I'm talking, of course, about Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. It is okay. That I know some people don't agree with that synopsis, but upon watching this movie for Cinema du Fromage so many years ago, it seems, that was one of my takeaways. That considering she was seeing all of these things, that everyone's like, "No, you're crazy. You're nuts. My wife is crazy," and drugging her and doing everything they can basically to, stop her, even though she was right. My takeaway was, yeah, she's kind of better off.
Okay. So I'm 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 gonna let you finish. But I also want everyone to know that there is a 1970s made for TV movie called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. But there is also a movie that Guillermo del Toro, apparently, who watched Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, and was scared by it, as was I. And he remade this movie into um, a a movie that had quite a different subtext to it. Same premise with the creatures, but these creatures are basically attracted to teeth. They're a little bit more
Creepy.
yeah, they're very creepy. They're homunculus, I think they call them. They're very creepy. That was in 2010. So the creature design is quite a bit obviously different, much more CG. The
Mhm.
1970s TV show, obviously, very practical effects, super cool. So go
Yeah.
ahead. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, throughout their persistence of trying to, and I'm going to say it like I see it, they're trying to woo the wife because they don't know better. They're possibly youngish, and you tease people to kind of get attention, and they have proven basically throughout the movie that they're mostly harmless, mostly. But all they want to do is take her with them and treat her better than her family treats her, which um, it's not really saying a whole lot, to be honest. But don't be afraid of the dark. I think in my heart, the creature's intentions are pure. They're designed, like you said, very practically, just super ugly. And there's always a soft spot in my heart for ugly, sympathetic creatures. That's why it is my number 10. Woohoo, number 10.
There we go. Okay, sorry, I was on mute. I feel like that was a really good starting point because that's actually a really it's a good movie, and I actually brought that movie to Cinema du Fromage, so I really really appreciate that. Um, okay, so my number 10 is actually a movie that I found earlier this year. Or yeah, earlier this year. It's called Psycho Gorman. It's currently streaming on Shutter. It's absolutely hilarious if you love Evil Dead, if you love movies that are comedy horror, you will absolutely love Psycho Gorman. On top of that, the kids that are in it are absolutely amazing. Kid actors are like, it's very difficult to get them to do things, I think, uh, can that can work inside of horror fantasy settings. But these guys totally did it. And the creature that I chose for Psycho Gorman is I mean, there's lots of different creatures. There is the Psycho Gorman creature, which the girl names Psycho Gorman for some crazy reason. Uh, but he is a little bit more prosthetically, he kind of looks a little bit more humanoid, perhaps. However, there is a talking brain creature named Krang. There's also a bunch of other minor creatures in this
Like
that
the
don't
Ninja
get a whole lot
Turtles.
of screen time, but they're super cool. Um, the reason that I chose this movie is because overall, first of all, they relied heavily on practical effects. So there's actual interaction with props. The creatures are really a part of everything. And although in some cases it's supposed to be silly, it's perfect. It's absolutely sort of like spot on. And one of the other things that I really loved about this was the effort that they put into the designs, like they're sort of, they're call outs to other things, but they're very but they include a lot of super neat ideas. So Psycho Gorman is my number 10, streams on Shutter. It's absolutely awesome. Definitely suggest that movie. As a good Halloween movie, that one stands by itself too.
That was your number 9?
That was my number 10. You're on
You're
number
number 10.
nine.
I'm on number 9.
Yes.
Sometimes I lose count.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for.
So my number 9 is also from the 70s. Because
Man,
what
what
can I
was it with
say?
the 70s trying to scare us?
The 70s did a great job in designing creatures and doing it practically.
Yeah.
Now, the simplicity of this particular creature or these creatures is it's super simple, but was done effectively. And quite frankly, if the cheese from this movie were melted, I would cover my nachos with it.
Uh-oh.
But I love it. And I'm talking about 1978's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Oh, that's a good one.
Now, it's not a premise that you walk into with your brain. This is a straight, you watch it, you know what it is. Don't let silly things like, objectively criticizing a movie creep into your psyche, because it's just not the right frame of mind to be in. If you happen to partake in any um, materials that could leave you in an altered consciousness, perhaps that's the way to go. I personally don't. I'm just naturally really weird. But Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is exactly what it sounds like. Killer tomatoes on the loose, killing people, leaving trails of tomato juice in their wake. The army is called out to stop them. Everybody tries to stop them, but no, they're too much. They're too dangerous. And I think the most beautiful thing about this, I don't even know what kind of grade to give it. There's B movies, C movies, all that. I don't know what it is. To me, it's like great B movie. Others might call it a Z movie. You know what? Let's not get to the semantics. Either way, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is my number 9 because it's hilarious. The creatures are easily identifiable. They're made dangerous, and the entire film was made for less than $100,000.
That's insane. My favorite line in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is, "Can somebody pass the ketchup?" Just flippin' love it. Okay, my number 9 is also one of those movies that I do sort of feel. Although, man, I gotta say, I've seen this movie in several different iterations. And the first time that I saw this movie, it was, I believe, in black and white. Like, I saw it on one of those, hey, it's way too late to be watching movies, but it's 12 o'clock and here's something that's on TV. Because I don't. Sometimes I wonder if there actually were adults in my life when I was a child. I just don't remember them. Or if they were there, they were not doing anything meaningful like stopping me from watching scary stuff on TV. I think that the first iteration of this movie was in black and white. And then it was kind of redone. And then it was even redone recently again. Um, and the nebulous nature of this creature makes it a little bit difficult to pin down. What is it? I don't know exactly. Maybe something kind of, well, whatever it is, it's hungry. It is the Blob. Um, and okay, one, I love this movie for its ridiculous simplicity. It's just such a simple premise. Some kind of meteor or space junk makes its way into the atmosphere. It unleashes itself on the world in a very hungry way, which is, of course, what all aliens would come here to do. I mean, there is a ready supply of game. And it basically just eats everything in its path. And it doesn't just eat everything in its path, it digests everything in its path, which I think is what actually makes the colorized version a little bit kind of weird, because they go through a lot of aches and pains to show you what basically digested or partially digested people would look like. And oh man, it's so creepy. But more than that, the blob feels like it could be around any corner. It could be just waiting to catch you when you're sitting in the chair and you wouldn't even know. They're all of those kinds of things made this movie incredibly creepy. I also really have to give a huge shout out to the original movie, The Blob, for basically making actors suffer through that kind of truly difficult makeup in order to have them look like they were being eaten by the blob. Uh, that had to have been something. I man, that it is just. I mean, I give them a lot of credit for that. The next version, um, the one that was in the 2000s, that one, it wasn't as scary, but it was fun. It was an exciting updated version of it where the blob itself was kind of uh, a little bit more fantastical but still fun. So my number 9 is the blob, and it can be either movie. I appreciate them both, but the creature element itself is super scary. So that was my number 9.
Excellent choice, that number 9. So my number 8. By the way, I just want to throw out there, if you're watching live, go ahead, shout out in the comments what you have for your favorite creatures, and we'll get those read. And if you're not joining us live, why not? Wednesday nights, 8:30 p.m. Eastern.
Still, tell us what movie creatures really scared you, or what movie creatures you love.
Yes. And number 8 falls into that more. I'd say it's in both of those categories, because at the time, I'll be honest, it freaked me out a little bit. I've given up trying to get these microphone levels right. I'm just gonna keep it maxed out. My number 8, coincidentally enough, came out when I was 8. And that's one of the reasons why it affected me the way it did, why it was a little scary. And that movie is Gremlins 2, The New Batch.
Oh.
Now, it would have been easy for me to say, you know what? I'm talking about the Mogwai, I'm talking about Gizmo, I'm talking about the Gremlin, I'm talking about all this stuff. Why not just go with the superior first film? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this list is about the creatures. And if Gremlins 2 gave us anything to really hang our hats on, it's a more diverse range of these creatures. We're talking adding wings and all sorts of different variations that, in my 8-year-old mind, made them infinitely more scary.
Mm-hmm.
Much more scary than, there's only the Mohawk.
They also seemed really cunning. Like, intelligently cunning.
Yeah, they definitely seem smarter.
That also makes them scarier.
Nothing really more scary than not only something that scares the crap out of you, but also can outsmart you.
To everyone who has kids, we all know what that means. Yeah.
Now, Gremlins 2, picks up not immediately after the first one ends, but Billy's moved to the big city, and he's working in a high rise, making a life for himself and Kate and Gizmo, and everybody's super happy until, of course, the rules are broken, and the Gremlins take over the building. Had quite a few great moments, especially when the Gremlins take over a TV show. It's an enjoyable romp. Looking back on it now, of course, you see the comedy. But as a little kid, much like the original, by the way, just a little shout out to the original. And as far as creepiness goes, I've made mention on the show before about how music for me ties deeply into like um, emotion when it comes to scary movies. Poltergeist really hits those buttons. Um, the first one, I used to freak out whenever somebody was like, "Do you hear what I hear?" I'm like, "Whoa, no, no, no! That is a bad song. We will not be listening to that. No." I digress. Gremlins 2, the new match, improves on the creatures in many ways for the second film, including making Gizmo arguably one of the most, you know, wonderfully awesome little dudes in film. Turned him into Rambo.
No, that's right. Literally turned him into Rambo.
Mm-hmm. So, for all these reasons, they add up to Gremlins 2, the new match, being my number 8.
Nice. I have to say, I actually could kind of kick myself for not thinking about that because that actually was. I thought about Gremlins, the original, and thought, no, it's not quite what I was looking for. But I
Mm-hmm.
think you're absolutely right. The new batch is actually, it is quite scary. Well, my number 8 is okay. So I have a love hate relationship with this particular um, monster type, I think. Um, I happen to love dragons. If you look around my house, I have dragon motif stuff everywhere. I have dragon paintings, I have dragon blankets, I have dragon pillowcases, I have dragons that are just like, little collectibles. Everybody who knows me ends up buying me a dragon for some significant holiday. Um, and I do really love them. But I also recognize that part of the reason that I love dragons so much is because they can be so terrifying. And the movie that I chose for this is the movie that I think makes dragons the most terrifying. Um, Not necessarily the most terrifying, like, oh my gosh, these are the scariest looking dragons in the world, but the creatures themselves had the most catastrophic effect on humanity. I am talking about 2002's Reign of Fire. Uh, Reign of Fire features dragons that have basically taken over the planet and have decimated the population. There are pockets of like resistance fighters, but they have truly changed the entire ecosystem of the planet. And there's all kinds of interesting sort of parallels, I think, that we can pull from this in terms of global warming. And I mean, there's like tons of metaphors that are involved here. But the bottom line is that the dragons themselves, as they proliferated, became a change engine for an apocalyptic event for humankind. And I kind of love that because that's sort of what I think would happen. You cannot constrain the effects that dragons would have. I love the way that in the series that's out right now, House of Dragons, it feels like the dragons are so confined and so, like maybe there's one or two wild dragons out there, but that to me doesn't, just from a practical sense, it doesn't make any sense. I feel like if there were going to be dragons, man, they would totally be the apex predators and they would take over our planet in a way that the dinosaurs took over the planet. So anyway, so I love this movie for that. I also really love the way that there is hunted aspect between the dragons and the people, and quite a bit of healthy respect going on in terms of what their skills are, what they can do, how they do it. It's quite interesting. I really love this movie for that reason. I also really love the dragon designs, and if you've ever seen a behind the scenes for this, although much of the dragon creature parts are CGI, it's still really amazing. The composting or the composting, the composite scenes that they put together are kind of amazing. There is a lot that I think the actors had to do with very little on screen, as is the case often. And they really made it work. They definitely made it work. Was really good. Highly recommend it. Love this movie. Absolutely love the fantastical dragon designs. And there's quite a few of them. There are many different designs. So big shout out to the dragons. So that's
So
my
one
number
that's
8.
not super critically acclaimed, correct?
No, Rain of Fire doesn't. To me, Rain of Fire is like one of those movies that's, if you love dragon movies, you'll love Rain of Fire. If you don't love dragon movies, or if you are looking for, something a little bit uh, more critically acclaimed, yeah, you're not going to want to watch that. Um, but I don't feel like there's anything wrong with it.
Oh no,
It got dumped on a lot, but I don't feel like there's. I feel like that is a lot of um, what's a good
anti-dragon
word?
propaganda.
Yeah, exactly right. No, lots of fake news going on about dragons and stuff. No, actually, it's not so much that. It's that I feel like at the time that this movie came out, it it didn't meet the expectations that I think people had for it, and because of that, it tanked the movie itself. But the movie itself is not terrible. It is just really different than I think people were expecting. Also, if you want dragons that breathe fire, like really breathe fire, this is the movie for you because these dragons are natural born arsonists. It absolutely is not about the dragons doing anything other than lighting things on fire. So there's a lot of that too.
I think it's really a movie that knew its audience.
It did. It definitely did. And it has kind of an odd cult following now. Just because people that love dragon movies, this is one of those dragon movies that's like everybody talks about it. It's one of the few that really center on just the dragons.
Okay, okay, it's a good pick.
There you go.
Glad you love the creatures there because my next pick does none of that.
Okay.
My next pick is the exact opposite of everything we've done so far. But I don't know how we could have had any kind of creature list without at least bringing up a movie about monsters, more specifically, pocket monsters.
Oh boy.
That's right, Pokemon. But I'm not talking about any of the cartoons. I'm talking about one of the first true, honest to God, good video game adaptation movies, Detective Pikachu. And there have been a lot of decent video game adaptations over the years, and especially when it comes to hitting, like I just said, knowing your audience. The Mortal Kombat comes to mind. I think Detective Pikachu was just a good movie.
Yeah, we love
It's
that movie in this house.
so. No, I'm not going to talk specifically about Detective Pikachu because, well, honestly, honestly, it doesn't quite meet the criterion for the list. The character Ryan Reynolds voices, but it's an entire world filled with Pokemon, and it's done in a way that I watched it. I'm not a huge Pokemon fan, but I watched it. And I'm like, wow, this really works. The special effects CG was top notch. The every single Pokemon that appeared, I thought fit into the world beautifully. And I lied. I'm still fiddling with the audio. So if it sounds like I get a bit distracted, it's because things like watching the meter on my microphone just jump straight up, and that's what's happening. Detective Pikachu, like I said, it's just a genuinely good movie with iconic creatures from, I guess, my late childhood, because I think Pokemon was like right after me. So like younger millennials, I would imagine this falls under their camp. I guess I was a Pogs guy, you know.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that should be about the age range, and then that's the weird thing about Pokemon. That's the weird thing about a lot of things from like my day and beyond. There's a lot of times that things have to be rebooted or brought back. Pokemon's one of those things that just hasn't gone away.
No, and it still has a massive following.
I just thought I would be remiss if I didn't have it on my list because it is an impressive addition to any um, creatures category. Detective Pikachu is my number 7.
So, okay. Um my number 7 is kind of, I don't know how to describe it other than to say um not I won't say it's an amalgamation because it's not exactly. But I but there is I chose the creature, not necessarily a specific movie, but you'll understand why when I say what I'm going to say. Because there's been a number of movies around this particular creature, and they all are treated interestingly, and some of them are kind of done a little bit better than others. But it feels to me like that's just budget, and did were we doing CGI or not? Um, and as sort of by way of backstory, this particular story was one of the first things that I read after I read The Lord of the Rings. Someone suggested it to me. I was a kid. I was not even in middle school yet, or just at middle school. Um, and I read this and struggled with it a lot. But I loved it so much. And so every time a movie would come out or anything would come out that referenced this material, I would get super excited. It's Grendel from Beowulf. And like I said, there's been a ton of, well, not a ton of, but there's been quite a few movies that have tried to tackle this. Some of them use super heavy CGI. Some of them are quite a bit more stacked in the practical effects department, um, using more tricks of the camera and dark to kind of make things feel a little bit more um, in the shadows, I guess, so that they didn't have to show quite as much. Um, there's even one called A Demon Named Grendel, which uses kind of a mix between practical uh, and some pretty good CGI. The reason that I think that this creature design is really good is because, and I'm kind of breaking my own rules, but not really. Grendel is a creature, right? It's a creature that was born kind of like of the collective sin of the king, and that's what's supposed to make him so hideous. It's not said that way, but that's the interpretation. Um, he's hideous because of that. And in fact, the other night, I don't know if any of you watch Billy and Mandy, but we were watching the Billy and Mandy cartoon, and there was the story about Jeff the Spider. And Jeff the Spider, all that he wants is for Billy to be his dad, and he's just trying to please his dad. And that's sort of what I catch from the Grendel monster. The Grendel monster is the kind of monster that is the most pitiful, because all he's really looking for, other than the taste for human flesh, is acceptance. And that makes the monster itself really sad, a really wistful, almost perfect poetic metaphor for who we are as people, what our, collective quote unquote sins do, how ugly hiding secrets can be, and all of that stuff. And it just feels so like, when everything is all put into the monster that way, it feels so perfect. It's a little bit like, to me, this is a little bit like a Godzilla moment, where the Godzilla monster is all about um, a collective culture, and what that represents. And Grendel in Beowulf and Grendel absolutely feels that way as well. So that is my number 7 choice, Grendel, from whatever version of Beowulf or Grendel the demon monster, a monster named, I'm sorry, a demon named Grendel, that you want to add.
One of the oldest epics around, yeah.
Yeah, and there's so many wonderful translations. And I have not read it in, well, I have read it. I don't know if I fully understand it, because I don't, obviously, I don't understand Old English, as that's not part of my, I can barely get through Middle English. Um, but it's beautiful in many different translations. The words that are used in this epic are, they're they're meaningful. I mean, there's a reason that I felt connected to it, especially after I had read Tolkien. It has a resonance to it. I mean, clearly, I think as an epic poem, this one shines right up there on the level of Gilgamesh. Absolutely.
Excellent choice, if you ask me.
Thank you. I love all these movies. I love to hate Beowulf so much. I really do. Like, it's just a thing.
I think it was made during talking about the CG spectacular that was Beowulf. It was made during a time when that was sort of, um, I'd say, a short-lived trend of
Yeah.
just, you know what, let's just forget sets. Let's just make it everything with a computer.
It's weird. It occupied a certain spot, and from an artistic standpoint, that particular movie, the movie that's just called Beowulf, or Beowulf and Grendel, I think the one that I really love is actually sort of the opposite. It's uh is it called, I can't remember if it's different now, but there is another one. There's another one that's Beowulf and Grendel that came out in 2005, which is not the CG version. But from an artistic standpoint, that movie Beowulf had a kind of, almost like we look back at different art styles now, and we assign different ideas about what was happening in the world. This was us truly experimenting with storytelling, as if, okay, well, all we really need is to just expand our storyboards. If we expand our storyboards, we can get a full length movie out of this, and we don't really have to do anything else. It's more grown up version of cartoon, because there's actual people behind it. And the people that starred in this movie, it was no small feat for them either, because they did a lot of the same things that like Benedict Cumberbatch did to play Smaug in The Hobbit. They're dressed up in these green suits, and there is definitely an art and a science to how they get such precision movements out of the actors, out of the characters on the screen, to look like real, like it's actually mimicking life. And I mean, it's great for what it was, but I also feel like it was short lived because it kind of feels cartoonish still, right? We're just not at that point. Maybe soon, but we're not there yet.
I'd say that somewhere along the lines, on some show or another, there's a comparison to be made between, that specific version of Beowulf, Sky Captain, things like that, and how they compare to um, 70s and 80s with rotoscoping.
Mm. Yeah, and if you'll notice, today rotoscoping is actually making a comeback for certain styles of movies. Um, there is still a place for that particular art style, as I think there is still a place for the art style that was that heavy CG. The one that I think about a lot is the Gerard Butler, Stellan Skarsgård, Sarah Polley. The, I really liked that version, mostly for the sets and the, I don't know, there's a roughness about that movie that makes me feel like that's where I am. But from a creature standpoint, obviously CG is always going to be able to deliver something that real practical effects cannot. So yeah, it's kind of a trade-off.
I completely agree. Now,
So
my
we're at number 6.
my number six is not, it's not CG, it's not even rotoscope, it's just straight up animation. And it's not full of scary creatures, but it is from the 80s. My Neighbor Totoro.
Oh, hey.
Talk about magical creatures. A whole forest full of them. Well, we begin the trend of this family moves into a house.
This family moves into a house.
Uh,
All Josh's movies ever. So this family moves into a house.
like except the
Okay, we
Goonies.
could be talking The Watcher, or we could be talking about My Neighbor Totoro.
To be fair, the Goonies is about people moving out of houses. So there's
Starting
that.
to sense that Josh is slightly nomadic.
Huh. Huh. I never thought of it like that before. I do like to wander. Anyway,
Well, that's okay because, not all who wander are lost. So,
My Neighbor Totoro is a beautiful story about a family that moves pretty far out there, would you say?
definitely.
And when they move in, there's a 10-year-old, 4-year-old. I really don't want to butcher names here. It's like Mei and Satsuki.
Mhm.
Get down, volume. Anyway, so they move into this house, and there are these little dust-like creatures that they see roaming about, and they're just kind of hanging out there until the kids are like not necessarily super freaked out, but they're noticing
Nervous.
things. Yeah, a little
Yeah.
nervous. And fast forward, wind up in the woods. Meet the Totoros, offer an umbrella, a friendship is born. There's a big old cat bus, leads to a beautiful sequence of riding the cat bus later on. And when I say beautiful sequence, I mean when it comes to animation, this was the 80s, and I'd say to this day, I don't think anything Disney has done can top that specific sequence because it is wondrous.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and um, not to go too far into the weeds here, but
Yeah.
um, Disney creatures are obviously for I guess obvious reasons. Disney creatures tend to align with very Western mythology, so they fit into a certain archetype that we're super familiar with. We know the creature tropes that
Hmm.
exist in Western mythology. um Studio Ghibli deals with a kind of blend, a cinema blend of East and West,
Yeah.
and East and Far East. And there are magical combinations of things that we cannot really, I think, imagine because we simply don't have that vocabulary in our mythology to express it. And so that's one of the reasons that I think that Totoro does such a good job, because it truly captures that essence that is a much different kind of creature mythology. So I think that that's a really good choice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That everything you said is the reason why it is my number six.
Okay, well, my number six has a variety of creatures in it, and some of them are seen and not heard. Some of them are heard and you don't see them coming. Some of them are gigantic. Some of them are small. It is crazy. I remember reading this book and thinking, this is the weirdest story I have ever read. It didn't help that I was also reading this entire story, this entire book, um, on a super long airplane trip from the East Coast to Hawaii. So I was up in the clouds quite a bit. In fact, most of the time. It is the Stephen King's adaptation, The Mist. The movie itself is Terabad. And I mean, I'm, not to dump on Stephen King adaptations, because let's face it, a lot of them just don't seem to roll in translation, but we love them anyway. We just keep making them over and over and over again. From the creature standpoint, though, The Mist is so terrifying because there is just so much unexplained in it, and the creatures that come out of it just don't, I mean, they don't make any sense. They one or two of them feels like, oh, maybe that's like a giant mosquito or something, but honestly that doesn't make any sense either, because it's not like all the other creatures on the planet suddenly got bigger. No, there's something really nefarious at work, and part of what makes the creature designs work is they're fairly minimalist because they are shrouded in the mist. So you're seeing, giant legs, you're seeing um huge eyes, or you're seeing weird sinewy limbs. It feels very scary based on what you don't see, and then just the small peaks of what you do see. And for that reason, I think the design of the creatures, while certainly not, we don't see a ton of just, oh, hey, here's the full creature in front of us. But what we do see is absolutely terrifying. And the use of the creatures themselves, the use of that psychological fear of knowing something's out there and not being able to identify it, just knowing that it's very deadly. I always found that to be such a terrifying proposition. Um, from a story perspective, it's sort of perfect, because the nebulous nature of what is going to come and get you cannot be defined, and that just heightens the fear. It truly was pretty masterfully executed from the creature standpoint. The rest of the movie was not so great, but still enjoyable enough that I would sit through it absolutely again. So The Mist makes my number 6. And honestly, I don't remember what year The Mist came out. I think it was like in the early 2000s, like maybe 2006, 2007. Um but in any event, it was actually, I think, a pretty good creature idea. It worked really well.
Another excellent choice, and I want to keep you. I want you to keep some of that in mind, because well, you'll find out later.
All right.
But we are moving into the top 5, our top
Mhm.
5s, and I'm going to continue my trend of not scary, even though it's spooky season.
But did the
But
family move into a house? Because that, I think, is, that's more important.
in this particular instance, no, a family
Oh.
does not move into a new house, but a group of creatures becomes a family and move into a new city.
Oh.
The scale got a little bit bigger as far as the moving goes. Well, I guess the new house families are probably moving to a different town too. And I guess Gremlins 2 does involve somebody moving to a new city. Man, I got to get off this theme. I'll have a top 10. I should just make a top 10 list of people that are born and die in the same place.
Hey, in The Mist, the guy he just happens to be going to the grocery store. So it is possible to do this without everybody moving.
One day, I'll find movies that don't involve anybody moving. But today is not that day.
Don't involve anybody moving.
Even in Back to the Future, my favorite movie of all time, involved somebody moving into a new house at the end.
That's right.
Or at least a new life. My number 5. I got to be honest. It was a toss-up between this and a similarly themed movie. That other movie was going to be Sesame Street's Follow That Bird. What can I say? I'm a child of the 80s. I love Big Bird. And that movie in particular was one of the first movies I was given as a kid to own. And naturally, I wore it out. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the Muppet movie.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
It's about Kermit going to Hollywood to make millions of people happy after, singing Rainbow Connection and a talent agent's like, hey, you should go into showbiz. And that might actually be where my affinity for show business, as they used to refer to it, became a thing for me. So it's a road movie mostly about Kermit getting to Hollywood and meeting everybody that would become the Muppets, meeting Fozzie Bear and Rolf and of course Piggy, the future love of his life. All of these creatures are wonderful. And that's a pretty generic term, I know. But the fact of the matter is, for puppets, Muppets. I'll do the terminology right. For Muppets, they were very simple, but they were capable of so much emoting and emotion not just due to the talented voice cast, which amazing, but there was something in the way that the the performances were done that took puppeteering like that to a completely different level, especially for a mainstream feature film. I know there are quite a few titles that have come out in the last, say, 10 to 20 years that have cutting edge technology that are, supposed to be the upper echelon of effects that can't quite get the same reactions or emotions, not only out of the puppets, but out of the audience. And that is, what, I'm gonna land that right into the laps of the writers who were able to take these Muppets and take what people already loved about them from their earliest iterations and create a wonderful story and allowed each character to showcase wit and humor and individuality in an ensemble piece that, if we made a list about ensemble pieces, would definitely also be a top fiver, because
Nice.
this all gels together so wonderfully. It sometimes you forget you're not sometimes you forget you're looking at felt, and sometimes you forget you're looking at creatures with somebody's hand up their bum. It draws you in, and it makes you a believer every time, no matter if you're 4 or 40. The Muppet movie is awesome, and that's why it's my number 5.
Nice. Um, I, yeah. Also, I mean, the Muppets have their own. They have their own culture around them, which I feel like really helps us develop them
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how we see them as actual characters and not just puppets. So, yes. And that, of course, is due to the true genius of Frank Henson, of Jim Henson and Frank Oz. I mean, honestly, the world would just not be the same place from a media standpoint if those two men had not existed. It's their legacy is absolutely astounding and worthy of every accolade that we could heap on it.
Hold on, I want to give a special shout out to the Muppets, if you recall that movie. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
just the fact that it was a dream project for Jason Segel,
right.
and he brought the Muppets back, and he did it with the respect that not just the IP deserves, but the characters deserve. And I think that was probably the best thing that he's ever done.
Yeah. Well, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like I said, there's definitely some. Uh, th- those shoes are so big to fill that so far I don't know who could fill them. Like it's just, and also it's just it's a particular period in time. We are still definitely transitioning in ways that I don't know where we're going to go next, but that is huge. It's just absolutely
I
huge.
know where we're going to go next. We're going to go to your number 5.
Right. Well, my number 5 is okay. uh, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I love this movie. I love seeing baby Neil Patrick Harris. Um, I love the ridiculousness, the call out to the insane patriotism. And this is like, years and years before I feel like what we have today in terms of being, sort of so what we think of as being so centrally polarized. This movie really capitalized on something that was a lot akin to this, but just bonkers in terms of what it is that we're supposed to be accepting here. It's called Storm Ship Troopers. The premise of this movie is basic. They are an army that is launched into space. They have been fighting a war with the bugs for a long time. And the look, first of all, the creature design for the bugs is insane. And I already explained how terrified of spiders that I am. I don't quite have the same phobia for other creepy crawly uh insects, but I will say that, man, they did a good job with these things. I mean, they really make you feel like where they swarm, they really swarm. There is something on point about how they figured out how to make these things work. Um, the big bugs, the really enormous ones, their design is so awesome. It gives you this like surreal feeling to what it must be like to be at war on an alien planet with an alien species, and you've got bugs that can shoot fire. I mean, like, it's crazy. I also really loved the idea that the bugs themselves, very hive mind in design. Um, the way that they sort of put them all together was not just a variation on a theme. Some of the bugs are extremely, like, they all look very different. And how these bugs with sort of intelligence operate is really bizarre. I mean, if you really stop and think about it, it's super bizarre. So don't stop and think about it too much because you'll ruin the movie. But it's definitely one of those like really good Saturday, it's raining, I need something to watch kind of movie. Um, and the creature designs are really exceptional. So for that reason, Starship Troopers makes my number 5. There's no creature in Starship Troopers that isn't, I think, well thought out. Somebody loved the art direction in this. This was somebody's passion project, and it really shows. Nobody was just collecting a paycheck on this. Like, somebody really loved designing these guys. And it, again, it just really shows. So that's why it makes my number 5.
That was an excellent movie that I absolutely loved watching back in the day. I never saw the creatures as scary myself, but I'm
Well, I don't know, bugs ripping your chest open kind of make me a little bit squeamish.
but it had Doogie.
Well, I mean, like I said, Neil Patrick Harris as a baby is just so very, very both amusing and delightful.
Wait, that didn't sound quite right.
I really also I really love I love the cool sarcasm that the movie portrays. It's just so dynamically on point. It absolutely is like make such a mockery of the things that we believe about ourselves in terms of patriotism, and it just throws it upside down, which is really awesome. I did just really loved it.
So my number 4.
Yeah, what is your number 4? I'm excited for my number 4, by the way. I can't wait to talk about this movie.
I'm also excited for my number 4 because it's got a couple things going for it. One, recency bias. I have to admit that. It's not an old movie. In fact, it just came out this year. but I enjoyed it so much it came out of nowhere for me.
Mm.
And the other thing going for it, crazily enough, nostalgia. So how can something be recency bias and nostalgia for a new release movie? Well, what if that new release movie is about something you loved as a kid? And when I was a young man of a certain age, there was nothing I loved more than this duo called Chip and Dale and their team of rescue rangers. Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers does the unthinkable. They throw everything you know about the cartoon out the window as far as telling that story. And it becomes this quasi meta look at the behind the scenes of the cartoon back in the day. And one, you're always going to hook me with some sort of quasi meta storytelling going on. And the fact that it was for a beloved children's cartoon, oh, exquisite. And the other thing that they did, which a lot of people thought unforgivable, especially in the trailers, the two leads, Chip and Dale, were done in completely different animation styles. Chip, traditional hand drawn animation. Dale got a CGI upgrade because it reflects not only who they are. Um, okay, yeah, it reflects not only who they are because you know Dale wants to be. He's that aging actor that's still trying to be a little hip, and he's really resting on the laurels of his, you know, big claim to fame from back in the day. While Chip's kind of just moved on with his life, and he's just doing a regular job where he gets recognized every once in a while. It involves going to conventions and seeing a lot of characters from different properties, and that was in and of itself very interesting to see that they could have just loaded up with 100% pure Disney properties, but no, they they added a lot of different characters from a lot of different shows and movies. Even if it's just in the background, I'm sure it cost a ton just to sell that this is a Hollywood, kind of like Roger Rabbit, where cartoons are part of everyday life. So as far as the plot goes, you know these actors have to basically do the shtick from the TV show. It's not necessarily an original idea. We've seen quite a few instances where an actor gets mistaken for a character they played, so they have to you know do the character bit. But this does it in a way that was for me out of nowhere because I would have never expected a Chip and Dale movie to do this. But just the fact that as creatures, these two guys aren't just heroes, but they're they're aging Hollywood stars trying to figure out exactly where they are in the world. Takes this kind of storytelling to a really weird level, and that's exactly why Chippendale Rescue Rangers is my number 4.
Nice. I actually, for the first time, I have not seen that movie, so
Wow,
that's the first movie on your list that I haven't seen.
that's so good.
Um, okay, my number 4 is a movie that came out in 1990, and I will admit that I am oddly, just weirdly in love with this franchise. Um, if there is a movie, in fact, the last one came out I think like 2 years ago. no matter how bad it is, and some of them are bad, I'll watch it because I really just love this franchise is just so fun. It is called Tremors. The creatures that are underneath the ground, they basically dub them as the graboids. Um, they also have a couple of other names in sort of uh, the other in some of the other movies. They're basically underground, ginormous, kind of wormy creatures that eat things, including, I mean, obviously they're interested in meat and flesh, but they will devour all kinds of things. Um, okay, movie wise, uh, it's a fairly straightforward movie. Um, so many good tropes in this movie, though. Truly, I mean, like some really good tropes. The creatures themselves are so perfectly designed to basically create a movie where the characters have very little interaction with the creatures themselves. And much like The Mist, we see them, we glimpse them, we know they're there, but they're mostly hidden. Um, it's again, this is just sort of like a super genius way of making a film using the 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 idea of the thriller of the suspense underneath it, even though the creatures you do see them, um it's the suspense of where will they appear, will they figure out, what they can do to get away when they're surrounded on the rock. It's just really, I just love this idea from the creature standpoint. um I also really really love um the idea that it takes everybody in the group to figure out how to combat these guys. Like there are so many different character archetypes here. There's the main hero. And then there are the people who are a little bit more Rambo-ish, if you will, survivalists. There's the, sort of mild mannered person. There's the dog. I mean, if you didn't know better, you'd almost think I was talking about an episode of Scooby Doo, but it really isn't. It fails to fit into any kind of neat envelope in terms of a movie because it was just so different for the time. I actually, there's some things that made me a little bit uncomfortable about this movie, but for the most part, the creatures so far outweighed any of that small discomfort that it really made me happy to watch it. And from an individual standpoint, it always to me felt like all of the main characters had such a huge stake in defeating this, not because, oh my god, uh it's going to be the end of the world, but more like we just really don't know what to do. This is really making us have to think in unexpected ways. And I kind of love that because clearly the graboids are not thinking like, they're not doing critical math skills or things like that. And in fact, some of the movie makes you realize that the writers probably weren't doing very much with math either, but that's okay. It totally worked. It did work. So I'm going to go with Tremors 1990 for my number 4 pick.
Fun fact, it almost made my list.
Really?
Yes, it was definitely on the long list, but at the end of the day, didn't quite make the short list. But
Hmm.
I had an eye on it.
I really do like this movie. It's quirky, but it's unlike anything else. I mean, I know the franchise itself has tried to recreate the original kind of charm, and it's never been able to do that. And that's okay. I don't, they all of the subsequent films do something different for the franchise. And some of them are really bad, but some of them are like they keep adding different things to the lore. They keep making things more interesting. The environments change. It's really cool. It's such a cool little franchise that like I said, they're not all winners, but they're all fun.
And I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at a movie, that's what I'm looking for.
Right, right. Yes. I mean, if I want something Academy Award winning, there are places for me to go to get that. But that's not my, standard weekend fare of looking for something to be entertained by. So,
All right. Excellent, excellent choice.
number 3.
My number three. My number three features creatures very prominently, but not any one particular type. No, it's a pretty good group of creatures, and it's done by a director who is, well, to say he's kind of all over the place sometimes would be an understatement, because I'm talking about 2009's Where the Wild Things Are, directed by Spike Jonze. Where the Wild Things Are was one of those books that has a permanent place in my memory as a kid. Whether it was, no, I'm going to say it wasn't necessarily the story that got me, it was the creatures, the art style of Maurice Sendak. It was beautiful. And even as a kid, I could recognize that there is true beauty in this work just from looking at the pictures. So when when it was to be adapted into a major motion picture, naturally I put on my skeptical spectacles, and I was a little concerned about this beloved childhood story. And to have Spike Jonze attached to it was an interesting choice, to say the least. But when all was said and done, they made this movie, the creatures, the wild things, looked absolutely stunning in a world that was vibrant and alive. It all came together very nicely to recreate a tiny bit of my childhood, watching watching the rumpuses, and building the fort, and doing all of these fantastical things as King Max takes charge of his minions, or of his subjects. That's more appropriate. I absolutely adore the way they tied certain practical effects and costuming with some CG enhancements. It blends almost seamlessly throughout. Now, if you're a younger viewer watching this for the first time, some of the scenes, I suppose, could be a little bit intimidating, if not just downright scary. But as the story goes on, you grow an affection for these wild things, and you learn to love and appreciate everybody because they're they're different. And overall, I think as a parent, you can be reminded that the power of imagination is not necessarily something to trifle with or take away from a young mind. A young mind needs to roam, to be free every once in a while. Yeah, you have to rein it in every now and then, but you know, young minds are meant to be wide and open, much like Max was roaming the island, and that's why
Okay.
it's my number three.
Okay. So I'm gonna agree with you that the creature designs in this were actually really good. And I mean, a la the Muppets, it obviously these were enormous for the most part, um, practical effect pieces, and then there is quite a bit of CG. However, I am going to vehemently disagree with the story. Um, I hated this movie. I wanted to love it. I like you, grew up reading Where the Wild Things Are. In
Yeah.
fact, I was so excited when I saw um, Labyrinth for the first time because I recognized the story as the Maurice Sendak story outside over there. I mean, like, I was super excited about it. I absolutely adore Maurice Sendak, and I feel like Where the Wild Things Are is that's definitely something that I pass down to my kids. Not because that was the easy book to read, but because it was the most fun. Every one of my kids would interact with that story. Okay, having said that, and this is not to diss whatever he thought Where the Wild Things what it was about. But the problem that I have with Where the Wild Things Are is that he turned the creatures into a kind of philosophical quagmire, which I feel like did not, it was too heavy from the top down. It was too heavy. It is an adult movie about what it means to lose your inner child. And I don't feel like that's what Where the Wild Things, what that wasn't what it was about. I get that that was his interpretation, and I appreciate the fact that that was his vision, and I'm not dissing that part of the vision. But as an adaptation, I tried so hard to love this movie, and every time I watched it, I felt like I was simultaneously being preached to and being threatened. And I just couldn't get into it. I couldn't I didn't appreciate the sense of how much uh both their discourse and the lack of levity that was involved in order to get Max to where he was and then have him be on the island. The monsters felt like they were some kind of, rather than being just, fragmented parts of Max's imagination, they felt like a therapist's floor of cut ideas, and somebody here quick cobbled together these pieces because this is what it's supposed to be about. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I'm not the kind of person who doesn't, where I don't have to. And I mean, I can look back on my list: The Mist, Rain of Fire, The Blob, for goodness sakes. I don't have to dissect every movie that I see in order to enjoy it. I cannot do the deep dive, and it's totally fine. But Where the Wild Things Are, again, I think like you, because it played such a huge part of my childhood, I couldn't not read into it and dissect it, and I think that that's what killed it for me. So, but I do totally agree that the creatures were amazing, and as iconic representations of who they were super awesome. the art direction in Where the Wild Things Are was really amazing. So I just had to fundamentally, I wanted to love that movie so much, but
I
I
get
just
it.
couldn't.
You just hate me.
Sorry. Okay, well, you can disagree with my next movie if you like.
I
My number
disagree. Oh, I'm sorry.
my number three is a movie where all hope goes to die. When I first saw this movie, I honestly couldn't finish it. I watched it super late one night when it had first come out on one of the pay channels. I couldn't finish it. I was so like I was disturbed by it, and now I watch it like 3 times a year at least because I love it so much. And especially if you know what happened behind the scenes, if you see how they did some of the practical effects, it makes you really appreciate this movie. It is Kurt Russell in The Thing. Whatever the thing is, or whatever the things are, it's terrifying. It's absolutely just horrifying to think that something has the property and presence of mind to be able to somehow assimilate not just who and what living organisms are around it, but also be able to utilize tools in the environment and go completely unnoticed. I Right now, I love this movie and I would watch it a billion times. Even the remake, although I wasn't so happy with it. Um, but even that had some really good, interesting effects. But the creature designs in the original The Thing, I think I have this like really deep level of respect for the art direction in this because there was so much practical effect stuff happening. It wasn't a lot of CG. And that makes it, I think, really sort of almost super terrifying because everything is up close, visceral, and just crazy over the top. I mean, some of the designs with the multiple entities inside of one as it's kind of twisting and moving is just man, it's nightmare fuel. So that's my number three. To this day, I still remember the feeling of being scared when I watched that movie. It had such a profound impact on me. And I grew up on horror movies. Although I was, scared by a bunch of horror movies when I was younger, I can't remember too many horror movies that have had this kind of visceral effect on me like The Thing did. So it definitely deserves my number three accolade.
The Thing.
The Thing. And what year did The Thing come out? Um, what year did The Thing come out? That was 1982. 1982. Man, that was 1982? Wow.
It's the year I was born.
That 1982, when you think about it, not to go off the rails again, but when you think about it, that movie, which still really stands up even today, have been made in 1982 is that's crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. To me, this is kind of like, well, I'll get into that because it kind of occupies my number one spot, but wow, that's breathtaking. No wonder it's in that spot for me.
I was not expecting. And yeah, yeah. That was
Well,
not. Yeah, not expecting that.
I'm just saying that, like, when it comes to true CG, obviously, I think we can all agree that we have hop, skipped, and jumped leagues into futuristic technology from 1982. So the fact that a movie can still stand up in 1982 as compared to what is happening in 2002 is kind of a big thing. I
Yeah,
mean, like it just not many movies actually do that because a lot of movies that were made around this time, they relied on a kind of I don't know, sort of shocky, but not really well done from the art department standpoint. And the thing just kind of marries everything perfectly together. So we're at number 2.
We are at number 2, and I decided to get back on board with the creature feature aspect of my number 2 pick. It's one that is scary. It's one that is iconic, and it is one that launched a franchise that I don't know created one of the most badass female leads of all time.
Hmm.
I'm talking about once again the 70s, 1979, Alien. Is there
Good choice.
anything scarier than it wasn't even like it is now where it's like there's an army of them. No, 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 no. No. This was just one on a ship on a very isolated ship as the the crew of the Nostromo are picked off one by one, and Ripley is trying to one figure out what's going on, and then two figure out how to survive. And I think when it comes to the Alien franchise in particular, it never quite captures the magic or the remarkable nature of just the struggle for survival. And I think that's what made Ripley such an interesting, compelling character. It wasn't that she could fight against these unstoppable beings or these crazy, powerful creatures. That to me, that wasn't what made her strong. It's the fact that despite all the odds, she figured out a way to make it out alive. That's what set Alien apart. It wasn't a sci-fi action flick like a lot of them are now. It was a straight up horror survival,
Right.
and it wouldn't have worked if the alien was just less scary. And I will say that it might be in no small part the see when I see one of those things, or at least when I did, especially back when I was younger, the first thing that pops into mind were like really ugly cockroaches, right? And slimy things and just creepy crawlies. And that creature design is nightmare inducing. And the fact
So
that it was so practical.
so
Hmm.
the uh uh alien, the xenomorph itself,
Hmm.
was a derivative of H.R. Geiger's designs, right? I mean, like most people know that. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
if you look at H.R. Geiger's, if you look at some of his other works, holy smokes, uh, they're really scary. He's a Swiss artist. He's got lots and lots and lots of work, mostly airbrushed stuff that is absolutely terrifying. And a lot of his stuff is kind of human blend. So like, it doesn't look human, but it feels like it could be. It's very, very, very frightening. And the xenomorph design, which, okay, so I'm just going to go into this because my number one choice was the xenomorphs from Aliens. And the reason that I chose Aliens is because I also felt like the queen deserved a creature star on my creature hall of fame here.
Kind of like the way I went with Gremlins 2.
Yes, yes. And also I feel like in Aliens we got a full breadth of what the aliens could look like, and I I just felt like there was more of them to sort of like appreciate the actual design functions. One of my favorite scenes in Aliens is when they are underneath they're basically looking for the colonists, and they're underneath the huge cooler, and they free the colonist from the sticky stuff that is supposed to keep them in place, and the walls begin to come alive. And it's a huge testament to how well the art direction with the creatures had progressed by that point, because you almost can't see them. I mean, unless you're really looking for them, you don't notice them. They just look like part of that secreted resin background. And it's just wonderfully done. The mix of the creature inside of the fantastical world, much like with Alien, although Alien itself is so much more of an excellent character study. Just the movie, not just the creature, but just the movie. The characters in Alien are just iconic beyond belief. They're perfect. Aliens begins to hone in both on the Ripley story, but also on the xenomorphs as these colony creatures that adds a whole new layer of terror. And again, the design is just, man, it is so good. And if you've ever seen some of the, again, the behind the scenes for Alien, you know that the art direction, the art team really went through great pains to make these creatures absolutely terrifying, and they're stunning. Just everything is so cool. Even just the slime on them adds this, like, that one small thing adds this incredible layer of factor. It's just so cool. Really, really, really love it. So awesome choice. I will skip my number one because obviously that was my number one. But I will tell you what my number two is.
What is your number two?
My number two is another. Guillermo del Toro has now made his appearance in our list twice. Once for Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which was the remake of the one that you chose, and for this movie called Mimic. The movie Mimic is not without its problems. It it's weird, but basically the premise is there was a cockroach infestation that caused a plague, which is not really too far. That's a thing that could happen. And the cockroaches are everywhere. So inside of a city, the cockroaches, the plague basically starts m- making all of the kids die, which is another, that's a variation on a theme that even I've worked with in different writings and stuff. And it is, the creatures in Mimic, they're meant to sort of look like normal. No, not normal. That's wrong. They're meant to do a bit of what a cheetah does in uh in their native environment, right? They camouflage in a way that makes everybody else around them not see anything except what basically is in the brush. And Mimic, the monsters have adapted to look like, sort of like people. They don't look like people. But when you just see them from afar, under a light, in a city, you don't notice them. And I really loved that. But I also loved, from a creature design standpoint, I also really loved the subsequent scenes that we get of the mimic monsters, which are very uh insect like. I mean, only Guillermo del Toro could come up with this kind of creature aspect with that kind of design and kind of make it work. It's really, really excellent. Little known fact, Mimic, which came out in 1997, has Norman Reedus in it. He stars as I think his name is Jeremy, and he's he's so young in this. It's hilarious. Like you'd never really know unless somebody pointed it out to you that that was Norman Reedus. But I will say that you can, if you look at his hair, you're like, wow, you've been wearing the same hairstyle since 1997. That's crazy. Good on you. So that is my number two pick. Mimic the scary cockroaches from under the subterranean city.
Another fun fact: I have seen this movie,
Yeah?
and it was in no small part to certain feelings I might have had about Mira Sorvino.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you think
15-year-old
of the
me,
movie?
Mira Sorvino. Yeah, it was. Yeah. Um, gotta say, I don't remember the movie all that much because, yeah,
they're
yeah, teenage
they're
boy.
they look a lot like they have kind of insectoid uh attributes, and the premise is that they evolved to have odd looking, from a distance. If you saw it, you might think it was a face, but that's just so that they could camouflage and look like they actually belonged in the city landscape. It's really cool when you think about, like, what that sort of means. It's like the evolution of the bug itself, in order to survive, started to mimic us so that it could basically survive being killed. It's just kind of neat. I really did like it. I love the art in this. As with most things Guillermo del Toro, uh, his mind is so twisted and so cool
A
that,
little bit,
yeah,
yeah.
I really super loved it. Super loved it. So that's my number two. Uh, I have to say, honorable mention goes to, although it didn't make my list because it was a tough choice. Um, but honorable mention goes to Pumpkinhead. I really wanted to choose Pumpkinhead because that also was a creature design. I felt like it was too human though. Like, I mean, clearly the story is meant to be whoever is the last of the revenge seeker is now the next Pumpkinhead. And I felt like it was too human, even though the creature design is totally alien and not human. It still felt like it didn't quite fit on my list because, yeah, human. So, but I did want to give a shout out to it because, again, the art direction in Pumpkinhead is also really good. Really love that. So what's your let's see, do you have number 2 and number 1 now?
Well, I already did my number two.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have number 1?
We're on my number one. My number one. Number one. My number one creature film is an all-time classic, especially for those that were around back in the day. 1984, directed by Wolfgang Peterson. It's The Never Ending Story.
Oh, yes, creature designs.
Yeah. The Never Ending Story. It's full of awesome creatures, from Morla, the ancient one, to the Rockbiter, to, let's see, you know it? Yeah, yeah. I'm pulling a page out of your book, Jen. You hear that? Pulling the page. Pulling the page. It has a dragon,
Yes.
a luck dragon named Falcor.
It's one of my favorite dragons, actually.
Wonderful dragon. And, I mean, no offense, but dragons aren't usually on my higher tier of things that I absolutely adore. But Falcor scratches so many different itches because dog, right?
Mhm.
People always say, "Is Falcor a dog?" No, Falcor is a dragon, but he's a fluffy, cute dragon, and that that and just who didn't have fantasies of riding Falcor all around? And God,
If
I love
pug,
Falcor.
if pugs could fly.
Exactly. Like I said, the Neverending Story is filled from top to bottom with amazing creatures, amazing effects that bring these creatures to life. Now, if you look at it through the lens of today's standards, you might say, I don't know, this all seems a little cheesy. But like I said, if you were there and you're watching this as a kid or a young adult, you see these creatures come to life and fall in love with not only them but the world and the story that's all being all coming together, and the fact that it was centered around a book, in it's like a story within a story deal. Again, love those weird storytelling ideas. So yeah, just it's telling such a wonderful story of a kid that becomes a hero by reading a book, which was me. That was me growing up. It's like picturing myself in the book, and this is the movie that it's happening in. Now, have I read the actual book? No, I haven't. I haven't read that, but the movie, simply wonderful. It's filled with emotion, on every level. You you feel for sorry, lost my train of thought there. You feel for everybody. How many kids in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years have you seen named Atreyu? Because I'm going to tell you, I've seen a bunch. And admittedly, some of them are because my mom liked this emo band back in the day, so she named me out for them. But even then, that name came from the Neverending Story. God, there are a lot of kids named Atreyu.
Right? Okay. So, uh super silly anecdote.
Go for it.
When I love the Never Ending Story too, and I actually bought this
You
super
really
early
like the second
on.
one more?
Never Ending Story.
And you said you like the Neverending Story too.
Oh, as well.
See what I did there? See what
I
I
did.
did?
Actually, I didn't really like the second one as much. It lost a little bit of its high magic. I This is back in the day of, oh God, how old am I? This is back in the day of VCRs. Okay, so my kid, my oldest, but he was at the time my youngest, was enthralled with this movie. Just absolutely loved it, and we watched it probably once a day for, I don't know, a long time. And at one point, he was like walking around the house with the cassette, and I was said, this isn't a good idea, because if you damage it, we won't be able to watch it again. And you know what his retort was to me? I can't damage it. It's the never ending story. So we even have a never ending story anecdote. Yes. But this movie definitely, we watched it. I swear we watched it once a day for months and months and months. My kid absolutely loved it, and he alternated between wanting to be the giant turtle, who he even had a Halloween costume to dress up as,
Mhm.
and Bastion. Interestingly enough, he never wanted to be Atreyu. So
I was
that,
going to say it's funny that all these people name their kids Atreyu, but no one's naming their kid Bastion.
and Bastion is actually the real hero of the story. I mean, not that Atreyu isn't, but Atreyu is being led by Bastion. So
It kind of goes hand in hand with I don't know. See, there was a band called Atreyu, and he's not exactly the hero of the story, but um, it reminds me of Hook. Everything
mm,
reminds me of Hook, and Rufio,
right.
whom there's also a band named Rufio,
Mm,
and people. I don't know if they're naming their kids after the band, but you see. Well, I guess a lot of people are still named Peter, but uh, no, you see a few Rufios, you see a few Atreyus, um, but nobody names their kid Peter Pan. Nobody names their kid Bastion. Um,
although
Luckily, nobody names their kid Falcor.
Although I did actually meet a kid who was named after the Neverending Story back when I was doing my kids club days at Four Seasons, whose name was Orin, and specifically he was named after the Orin and the Neverending Story. So yeah, fiction has a huge impact on us, and sometimes I feel like, especially creatures, they manifest to us all these really interesting ideas that are difficult for us to explore. It's hard for us to explore what it would be like to be a Falcor. Um it's easy, I think, or easier, I should say, for us to recognize what it would be like to ride or be, like on the back of Falcor and be able to, go attack our bullies or something. Like that is an actual interesting use of characters as they relate to our stories. Um, Not all creatures have to scare us, although I feel like that is sort of, at least for me, that is sort of the um when I think about creatures that have really good art design, a lot of the art design goes into making us scared. We're scared of the unknown. We're scared of things that maybe look a little bit like us, but deviate in terrifying ways. We're the creatures, especially the creatures that have made up both of our lists, even when they are benevolent, they are if we ever saw them without the context of the fiction that we're reading them or watching them in, they would be terrifying. It would be
Fair point.
terrifying to see something like Totoro just if you went on a forest walk. You
Hmm.
would run for your life. So there's some really interesting ideas behind why creatures scare us, and partly, let's face it, I feel like one of the things, since we're in spooky season, that makes scary movies scary is anything that threatens the apex predator in us is really scary, because we're supposed to be on top of the food chain. We're not supposed to be hunted, at least, in our own minds. And so anything that does that, and by advantage, a creature that has a design that gives them an edge up on us as the apex predator, that makes it super scary and terrifying. I think that's one of the reasons that we love to watch movies where we are sort of in that threatened position, because we don't get to experience that hardly ever. We are not the hunted of the species on this planet. We are the apex predators. So
That is, I hadn't thought about that before. Huh.
I think that's one of the reasons that the aliens are so incredibly the xenomorphs are so incredibly frightening because they rely and they could rely on more stuff. We know that Alien is actually getting a TV franchise. I don't know when it's going to release. Probably not until 2023 or maybe even 2024. But the premise behind the xenomorphs is that aliens use us as incubators. They use us as like vessels for their procreation. And that
Mhm.
also is absolutely terrifying. And I think that that's one of the reasons that it continues to be such a good and shocking design. It's because the just the life cycle of the xenomorph is it's a terrifying uh well, cycle isn't even the right word. There's a terrifying metamorphosis that has to happen. And for us, we only recognize the xenomorph as using us as basically an incubator for its young. There's no other point behind it. That's crazy. It's just so crazy. I really, really, really love the lore of this. It's very cool. It's very cool. Why we are scared by certain movies and certain creatures is like a psychological science all by itself. Very interesting. That's one of the reasons that I chose creatures for our list this week. So I'm really excited to hear what our next week's list is going to be about.
I'm sure you are, but I'm not going to tell you just yet.
Okay.
First, let's recap
Okay.
tonight's list. Would you like to do the honors?
Sure. Okay, so on my list, on my number 10, I had Psycho Gorman. Specifically, I called out Krang the Talking Brain, which was terrifying. Not really, but it is terrifying. Number 9, The Blob. Number 8, The Dragons from Reign of Fire. Number 7, Grendel from Beowulf. Number 6, all the creatures collectively in The Mist. Number 5, the bugs from Starship Troopers. Number 4, the graboids from Tremors. Number 3, the many iterations of The Thing. Number 2, okay, the scary cockroach species in Mimic. There's a couple of different names, but I'll just go with that. And number 1, the xenomorphs from Aliens, including my favorite design, the Queen. I love her and her little Elizabethan collar that she wears. Very cool.
Well, my list. And just a little FYI, right before the show started, I mean, like literally right before we went on the air, I took the last second at it. And I added Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. And for those of wondering, what did you take off? Well, I took off the original Men in Black.
Oh,
So, yeah.
also a good one.
Yeah. I absolutely enjoyed the alien / creature effects in Men in Black. And seeing a guy get his head blown off and then it grows back. And he's like, yeah. But I thought, you know what? I think Alien will cover the aliens part of part of my list. So I
Nice.
decided to make room. But my number 10, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. My number 9, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You know. Number 8, Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Number 7, Detective Pikachu, but all the other Pokemon. Number 6, My Neighbor Totoro. Number 5, The Muppet Movie. Number 4, Chippendale Rescue Rangers. Number 3, Where the Wild Things Are, for the creatures, not so much the story. Mm-hmm. Number 2, Alien, the original, the OG. And number 1, The Never-Ending Story. Loved them all.
Yeah, there's so many creature designs that we could have included on our lists, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that these are just some of our favorites, but I mean, these lists could go on and on and on. So I really am interested to hear what other people think about what their favorite creatures are, because God, there are just so many. I mean, it's like it's almost, I don't want to say it's limitless, but it feels like obviously we are missing some that are
Mm-hmm.
absolutely beloved by others. So
I'm sure people are yelling at their devices like, how could you not include that?
I
How could you
know,
not
right?
include Leprechaun? How could you not include Critters? Things like that. So
Well,
if,
I'll
if
be
you do,
interested to hear.
leave those lists in the comments. Tell us what we left out. Tell us what you would have added, and we will talk about it next week on the show. I think we could set aside a few minutes to talk about listener lists or viewer lists, however you're consuming this product. But you're probably wondering, and I know you are because I already said you were, what we're going to talk about next week.
Yes, I am.
Well,
Since I have to make a list about it, so yeah.
I'll make things easy for you and actually let you know what it's about, because it's going to be a little more broad next week.
Okay.
And I do feel it
So
will.
Sin City, because all about the broads.
I was going to make a joke like that. I was, but I
It's
decided
kind of insensitive,
maybe I
though.
shouldn't.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't do it either, because it's probably not good for me either. So apologies. Yes, continue.
All right, so the subject is a little broad, and I'm really not challenging you to think of something for your list, but challenging you to narrow your list down to 10. Because for the final episode of Spooky Season, it's all about the Masters. What does that mean? I bet you're asking yourself.
Golf movies?
Yes, it's all about golf movies. Happy Gilmore for the win. But no. It's horror takes many shapes, many forms, and it takes a village to bring horror together. So rather than talk about one specific director, one specific actor, one specific makeup artist, I want us each to come up with a master of horror, whether it is a director, actor, makeup artist, whatever the case may be, whatever the job. If you think, you know what, the guy that did the lighting on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 has such a great and illustrious career that he is a master of the genre and he does lights. If that's the way you want to go, fine. Or if there's an actor that you feel is synonymous with horror, then go with that. But the idea is we'll take the masters of the genre and showcase them and an example of their work.
Okay.
So I'm opening up the door very wide to be able to give us the master writers, actors, directors, makeup artists, gaffers, best boys, everything. If you think that what they do, one, they're a master of, and two, makes them a leader in the industry and in what they do, by all means, add them to your list. Give an example, and then we'll of course talk about the example and why that made your list, and why the specific person made your list.
Nice.
I just thought to close out spooky season, we should honor, all of the horror greats that allow us to enjoy these spooky movies this time of year.
I think that's a great idea. And also, I think that there are a lot of very unsung heroes of the horror genre, other than off the top of your head saying, like, oh, yeah, I love Rob Zombie, or oh, yeah, I love, whoever. Um, yeah, there's a lot of very unsung heroes that do the very technical work, which that could make this a very interesting list.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
And
I'm excited. That's a good list.
speaking of technically, you do amazing things over at moviesandmeals.com.
I've been so remiss at getting all of my recipes up, but I really am trying. In fact, we did a whole bunch of shoots last night to get some of our stuff up. But it is spooky season. We still have tons and tons and tons of recipes that are all centered around Halloween. In fact, one of the movies that's on our list, in fact, two of our movies that are on my list have recipes for them. I have Psycho Gorman crystals, which you won't know anything about unless you actually watch Psycho Gorman, but it's super cool. And I have a recipe called Ripley's Alien Eggs, which are really fun to make and super easy and really disgusting if you want to make them disgusting. So yeah, join me over at moviesandmeals.com. Also join me tomorrow night if you'd like to listen in on our TV Dinner podcast. TV Dinners this week is going to talk about TV tropes, and we're going to carve out a small section for the adoration and / hatred for James Bond. I know some of my crew really hate James Bond, and some of my crew really love James Bond. So we'll have that discussion as well. But TV tropes, and James Bond would not be James Bond without a zillion tropes involved. It's kind of cool. So we're going to talk about that. And what else do I do? I guess that's about it for now.
You do so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, not, I
You're
do.
Very good at it.
I do, but these are the things that I wish to shine a spotlight on. There we go.
Well, if anybody's interested in the things that I do, you can go to wadcomedia.com, where you'll find all of the pertinent links and information. Find the Facebook pages. Give them a big old like. If you like the videos on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Smash that subscribe button. I think that's how you do it. If you're watching on Twitch, what's up? It's not a gaming stream. Sorry. I do that sometimes, though.
I'll play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm just saying. If you're up for a D&D session, I'm right here.
Hey, so. I'm always down. I got the dice.
Me too. Several. Many.
Although, little off topic, the new rule book for the Marvel tabletop RPG is going to be hitting soon.
Yeah, that actually looks pretty exciting.
I thought it was something that I could use to break my kids into the tabletop lifestyle.
Yeah, well, it actually does look really exciting. The rules alone look super interesting. I mean, not that I love rules, but I mean, it feels like it's going to be an easy adaptation to game night. So I'm excited about it. Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe a show will spawn off of that in the future. But that's for future talk. If you want to talk short-term future talk, the Wadcast is Friday episode number 109. Oh my God, we have a topic on Wednesday. We have a topic ready to go.
Whoa!
And, this week, episode number 109, we're going to be talking about heroes that aren't heroes and villains that aren't villains. Because every once in a while, you see a movie and you're like, wow, the protagonist of this movie was not that good of a person. And they don't have that story arc of being a better person. They just kind of continue being a bad person. So maybe
looking at you, Halbrand. Looking at you, Halbrand. That's a Rings of Power reference, but yep, looking at him.
And the same can be said for some villains that they're not necessarily the bad guy. They're just the ones that the story's just not being told from their perspective. So
I love anti-heroes, actually. I think anti-heroes are a whole very interesting group of characterizations for main protagonists that go very unsung. And people also get very upset when heroes turn into anti-heroes, or they're revealed as anti-heroes, I should say. That's a great topic. Good job.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Although it's one of those times where I kind of regret having a topic picked out on Wednesday, because as the news has been breaking this week with Black Adam and its less than stellar reviews, it seems like a good time to remind people about critics' reviews and remembering to just like what you like.
Right.
A lot of the movies on our list, not just tonight, but overall the course of the series, have included movies that may not have been critical darlings, but just throwing this out there, I think critics are more trying to objectively look at, was this movie made well? And does the story flow? That kind of thing. Not so much really deep diving into the feelings of a fandom.
We're going to talk a little bit about this tomorrow on TV Tropes too, because I think that a lot of critics are applying a kind of entertainment logic to their critique, which doesn't quite work for actual audiences. And I feel like we can really see this with Rotten Tomatoes, where we have comparisons between critic scores and audience scores.
Right.
It can be worlds apart. And so obviously people like what they like.
And that's John Hodgman's, or Judge John Hodgman's, one of his big rules. People are allowed to like what they like, and dads will be weird.
Yeah. Okay, both true. Super true.
But that's gonna do it for us here tonight. Wow, it's weird how 10-1 has gone from a quirky 60-minute or 60 to 90-minute show to now regularly pushing over the 2-hour mark, now that we have the time to stretch our legs. I love it. I love making lists, and I love talking about them with you.
Yeah, I'm having so much fun, and I feel like we cover a lot of ground. So, no regrets.
No regrets. So, until next time, thank you all for joining us. I hope you'll enjoy some of our other fine programming, and I guess we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
We named the dog Indiana.